Mi invitado de hoy es la voz internacional de los deportes de acción. Por muchos años, él fue el comentarista en inglés de los X Games para ESPN. Su contribución en el crecimiento y expansión de los deportes extremos ha sido gigantesca. Me da un gusto tremendo recibir en el show de George X por BrinxTV a mi querido amigo y colega Selema Masekela. When I joined ESPN Deportes back in 2004, I was, exclusively covering the X Games, and you were the person I looked up to.
I remember when you first came up to me and you were telling me like a bunch of things that I said. And I was like, I said that? And you're like, absolutely. I had to translate it. 2004, I think at that point I'd been with the X Games for about 5 years. And obviously when you came on board is when the rocket was still very much ascending, right? We were really just beginning to take off and explode and take advantage of the momentum that I think that was built obviously from Tony Hawk's 900 and the Giant Skate Park Tour and the explosion of moto, etc. And next thing you know, we're bringing in rally cars and snowmobiles and all the things. And it grew into something huge and special. And I think that progression that took place, I'd say from about 2004 to 2014 was an incredible era.
My first time at the X Games, I was impressed. I was overwhelmed. It was like a different world. I mean, the huge mega ramp there and seeing, the Yasutaka brothers in the vert ramp. I mean, Bucky Lasek and the BMX, Dave Mirra. And I was like, this is a different world. And I couldn't believe that I was part of it.
It was a time of real superstars. You mentioned some of those names, in each sport. You had a definitive superstar who not only represented the core of their sport, but whom the general public had become to associate with their sport. And that was, I think, was what was really powerful was, to watch the rise of the Shaun Whites and the Dave Mirras and athletes like that. Like you said, the Yasutokos, who they became sports celebrities in the same right with some of the biggest stars in the world. And I think that right now we are on the cusp of what the next chapter of that looks like.
I've been lucky in my career in action sports and combat sports to have worked with a lot of very talented people. And you're right there at the top because you're such a great storyteller. I mean, is that skill natural?
When people ask me what I do for a living, I usually lead with the fact that I'm a storyteller of action sports culture. Sometimes that means commentating. Sometimes that means doing play-by-play. Sometimes that means being a host, interviewing. But it is my favorite thing. I feel it's our responsibility to the audience is to tell them the stories of who these people are and why what they're watching matters. But I learned it from my father. My father was a musician, an incredible musician and a performer. And so when I was a little kid, I would be in the jazz clubs watching him with his trumpet and singing. And he was a storyteller in how he played his songs and sung his songs, but it was also the time between songs that he would take with the audience and where he would really capture their souls. And that's really where I think I learned how to lead with story. Then obviously I fell in love with action sports as a teenager, first with skateboarding, then surfing and snowboarding, and chose to be like, okay, well, I want to figure out how to continue to live this life. It's too much fun. Got an opportunity in media, first starting at a magazine, at Transworld Snowboarding and Skateboarding magazine, and then finding my way to be on the microphone, first like announcing, demos and small contests where you're just talking to the crowd, not on television. And I started to really storytell in those spaces. And people were like, hey man, can you come to this next contest? Because everybody liked what you were doing, not just the crowd, but also the athletes. So by the time I got my opportunities at ESPN, first at MTV, and then at ESPN, I did not know what I was doing as a journalist
Oh,
or a
wow.
broadcaster.
It's not like you had like a plan already, you know, it
No,
started happening.
no plan. Didn't know what I was doing. When ESPN called me the first time to come and be a sideline reporter, I was like, oh, so I get to come and interview my friends? Okay. That sounds fun, you
Yeah.
know, and I think it was my natural excitement about what I was talking about and my passion for it. And I wanted the audience to know who these people were. That's what ESPN saw in me.
I remember so well your interviews with Shaun White, like a kid Shaun White. Like Shaun White had like his mask on and everything. And you were like, come on, man. Come on, kid. I mean, respect the audience. Like, and kid was like, okay. I mean, he was just a kid. But you were like a grounding presence.
Thank you. You know, I think I was, I remember that interview very, very well when I pulled down Shaun White's mask.
Yes.
And it ended up being a pivotal moment for him that he would thank me for later, because it would be like, look, man, right now, it's not your job is not to try to look the coolest. You need to appeal and connect with all these millions of people who want to know who you are, and athletes learning how to build their brand. And I think a lot of that came from realizing, like, you know, it was the first time for our industry that they were able to quantify that there was a value to exposure to audiences outside of the core, you know? And yeah, I think it was fun to be able to play that big brother role
Yes.
for a while. And now I'm the cool uncle.
How did you develop that passion for action sports? I mean, you grew up in Southern California and you started surfing or skateboarding first?
So I grew up in New York first.
Oh, New York. Okay.
In New York first, where I wasn't exposed to any of it. And then my mother and stepfather moved from New York. I grew up in Staten Island and Harlem to New England, to Massachusetts for 2.5 years. And it was a difficult time. I was in junior high school. I moved in my 8th grade and then 9th and 10th grade. Into my junior year of high school is where I was in New England and I was kind of lost. And what's really interesting is that the high school that I went to was very cliquey, and it was football and all, you know, team sports. But what was most interesting was that there were 5 kids in my school that all wore crazy earrings and concert t-shirts, and they had safety pins down the side of their pants, and they wore like leather jackets, and they had spiked hair, and they carried skateboards. And they were the kids that were the coolest and most welcoming to me. And specifically, there was one kid, this guy named Scott Forbes. I was curious about the skateboarding. To me, it looked like wow, like almost like they were like breakdancing on these boards. And he gave me my first skateboard, and I went skateboarding with them. He gave me a Thrasher magazine. And I was just like, whoa, you know, I spent all day in my backyard trying to learn how to do tricks off of my porch and curb skate. And a year later, after he gave me my skateboard and I started skateboarding, my parents surprised me in my junior year of high school that we're moving to California, and happened to move to Carlsbad in the north of San Diego.
Yeah.
Which we get there. There was no way to Google where we were going in 1988, but I happened to move into a place that was like the hotbed of this culture that I'd seen little pieces of in the magazines, but I didn't know what it meant. And I moved into the skateboarding, surfing mecca. I started surfing right when I got there, fell in love with it, and I was like, this is it. 6 months later, I started snowboarding, and these sports were life-changing to me in a way that I never knew was possible as a kid. So I think that's why I wanted to stay so close to it. And it made such a difference in my life and how I express myself that I really became like, I want other people to feel this. And I think maybe that's where, like you said before, my passion for sort of storytelling it once I got the mic, people were able to connect with that.
I identify with you because as a Spanish commentator, as a Spanish broadcaster, I was supposed to cover soccer or lucha libre. And nothing against those sports, but those sports are not my jam. I'm not passionate about those sports. So I was more into martial arts and adventure and action sports. But unfortunately, those sports were not mainstream in Mexico. So that they were not sponsors, and the networks like Televisa were not invested in it. So I moved to the States, in search of new opportunities. So was that kind of like the same for you in terms of the sports you were supposed to cover because of your color or background?
Absolutely. I mean, there was nobody who looked like me when I started doing these sports. And there were a lot of people that made sure that I knew that they didn't think it was cool that I was there.
Oh.
And so I think that definitely lit a fire underneath me that made me more passionate. I remember showing up to go surf or to go snowboarding, and people asking me what I was doing there, or we didn't know that this is what Black people did. I still get that to this day.
No way.
I was having a conversation with my friend this morning. It was another Black surfer. I asked him how the waves were, and it was on a call just before I got on this interview with you. And he said to me, man, I paddled out at El Porto, and this guy came up to me, and he's sitting next to me in between waves, and then he finally is just like, hey, where are you from? And he's like, I'm from here. And then he's like, well, how did you start surfing? And he's like, well, like anybody else.
Exactly. It's just like grab a board and I started.
I started paddling out. Yeah. And then the guy's like, well, whenever somebody leads with, I'm not racist. It's just that I don't see you people out here.
It means the opposite, clearly.
And we learn how to laugh about these things, but I don't think that people realize what a kind of love you have to have for a thing that is supposed to just be where you have recreation and play and get away from the bullshit of the world. You have to love it in a different way, knowing that like every time you go to do it, there's a strong chance that you're going to experience something in which someone tries to make you feel that you are entering into their space, as opposed to that space also being yours. And I felt that growing up so much, like I'm not supposed to be here. And maybe you think that I'm a different version of a Black person that's more like you. People would tell me all the time, like, it's so cool that you're more like us and you do our sports. I love football. To this day, I'm passionate about those sports, but also these, as is everyone else.
Exactly.
But for some reason, when you show up and especially when you're Black and brown, this idea that like, oh, but you don't get to do all of the things.
Yes. Like you need a special membership here. If you don't have it, you're not allowed.
And so people, even the idea of people justifying it to be like, oh, well, you're a break from what your people are, and I'll just make it so that you're more like us, and that'll make it easier for me to process. Like people literally telling you that you're a different type of Black guy. But those are the things that really drove me. If I'm being honest with you, George, like it really drove me to try to figure out how to be the best that I could, so that I wanted to get to the top spot. I wanted to become the voice and the face of the X Games, because I knew that there were a lot of people who didn't believe that I was supposed to be there. And it definitely was a driving force. I had no idea, though, at the time that my presence was affecting kids who were watching television who look like me, to say, oh, well, I can do that too.
No, and thanks to your persistence, your talent, and hard work, it paid off, because what a career you built. I remember back in the day, you were hosting a show on E! Entertainment Television. I never watched E. And I started watching the Daily 10 because of you. It's like, come on, are you kidding me? I mean, am I watching this? And the next show was maybe the Kardashians or something. But before that, I was like, okay, no, I'm going to watch it because, Selema is hosting. So yeah, you did it, my friend.
I still can't believe that era happened, George. I tell you what. Sometimes people remind me, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right.
I did that.
Almost 5 years at E 5 days a week. But here's the funny thing is that if it wasn't for my exposure to the general population from X Games, I would have never had a shot at that job. And then being able to do that show where I had to be like outside of X Games and X Games events, I was in the studio 5 days a week.
Oh wow! It was full time.
You're writing your stories, you're producing, and then you're going into the studio every day, and you got to do a new show every day. That was grad school for me. You got to show up and bring it, and make each one feel like it's brand new. And so it was really fun. So weird, especially when you bring up the Kardashians and all that stuff. I was in.
I mean, you brought the coolness to that show because you have such a cool, laid back style. Sometimes Latinos, we are overhyped, and I try to bring myself down. Like, oh, come on, man, just settle down. Just because we start getting too energetic. And I'm like, how can I be more like Selema? That he's more. Just chilled, man. It's just,
I appreciate that. That comes from a music background.
Yeah.
Because a song can't start out with the chorus, right?
Yeah, too hyped.
It has to build through the verse. You come up to the chorus, you come back down, right? You come back down, build to the chorus, and then on the way out, it gets bigger and then it fades.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that I've always looked at it that way.
There are legendary footage of you celebrating the double backflip of Travis Pastrana. I still remember I was there. There was such tension beforehand because we didn't know what was going to happen. It was the first time ever. And I remember Travis' mom crying, and I remember the whole, his armor, underneath, like to protect his neck and everything. It's like crazy. And then the way you celebrate it, man, priceless.
I think all the reasons that you just stated is why I responded in that moment. The discussion, we had a production meeting before Travis went out to do the double backflip in 2006. I remember the production meeting we had that day, and it involved an entire run through for how we were going to handle what our job was for the broadcast if Travis died.
Oh, wow.
I think why I love what I do so much is that I am fascinated at human possibility. And there is no vehicle that I've seen yet in my life that really challenges and marvels at the endless nature of human possibility than action sports.
Mm-hmm. What was the state of action sports in the mid-90s, and what happened because of the X Games? The popularity boom.
In the early 90s, it was on life support.
Oh,
nobody cared about skateboarding. The money went away. There was this excitement around action sports culture and from the mainstream, and then they're like, oh, all right, we're on to the next, right? And so the only people who cared about it were the people who were doing it. And in the mid-90s, 1995, Ron Simeo had the ability to realize that, like, I'm going to create something that gathers all these individual sports together. All these sports, deciding to put them together was insane. It was an insane concept. The culture and the core and the progression of the sports and the tangibility to just the everyday person watching lay in skateboarding, in BMX, in inline at the time, in snowboarding, which would expand to skiing. And those are the things that remain to this day.
So much history. It's incredible that an event and a brand has lasted for such a long time, especially with social media and video games and everything now. And it's crazy. And now we feel that there's, as you mentioned earlier, there's a new chapter. There's been 2 or 3 huge announcements lately. Number one, you're back hosting the X Games.
Yeah.
But not
after
only
a
as
10
a
year
host,
after a 10-year layoff.
10 years. Oh my God. I thought that it was less, like fewer years. I mean, that's incredible. Tell me all about your new role and all the vision that you have in this new chapter of the X Games.
You know, when I left the X Games in 2013, it was the hardest decision that I'd ever made. I've been there at that point for almost 14 years. The X Games raised me and made me. Mm-hmm. When they were starting X Games Global at that time, I did not feel that it was sustainable. I worried that it was going to dilute the brand, and that if it wasn't successful, that the X Games would in turn become smaller. When Global didn't succeed, you know, it lasted 1 year. I was like, well, at least I was right about that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not that I wanted to be, but I'm glad. And then, you know, over the years, ESPN started to take a little bit. It was no longer a priority. The thing that they owned was no longer a priority. And we saw the X Games the footprint get smaller and smaller, which was very hard to watch from afar. And there was never a day in which I was like, yeah. I was like, no. You know, because X Games is so important to it's the most powerful brand in the action sports culture. Period. Yeah. And so when they sold it, and I remember hearing the rumblings that it was going to be sold, I was curious. I was sad. I was like, wow, it's the end of an era. But there was no place in my entire psyche that thought that we were getting back together. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I got a phone call from the people who bought the X Games the week after the announcement. Wow, that fast. First, it was a DM, and then a text message from friends being like, "Hey, these people want to talk to you," and you're like, "They want to talk to me?" And then you're like, "Do I want to talk to them?" And I said, "Okay, let me see what they have to say." And it was, you know, it was a really healthy conversation around them realizing that it needed to be built back up to what it was before. And would you come back? And I said, well, I'll come back, but I'll only come back if I can have a seat at the table behind the scenes. Yes. A voice. Yeah. I got to have a voice. I got to have a seat at the table. I have to have a voice in an executive position in the interest of the culture. I can't just rely on the decisions that you're going to be making. I need to be able to contribute, which I didn't think they'd go for. And they went for it immediately. Mm-hmm. And here I am today. You were needed. You were needed back at the X Games, but also all the incredible projects that you're undertaking. I mean, it's huge. So thank you, George. I really appreciate it, man. And, you know, next time, you know, I'm sure you saw our announcement of X Games League. I did. So we're hard at work at developing what that's going to look like. And hopefully next time we get together, I'll have some great news to share in that end as well. Absolutely. Yeah. Coming in 2026, if I remember correctly. Okay. Yes. So yeah, more news to come. So for now, I'll let you go. It's been an hour and I know that you're a busy guy, but thank you. Thank you so much. It's great talking to you, man. Too easy to make time for you, old friend. And thank you. Wonderful to talk to you as well. Same here. Selema Masekela on the George X Show. See you soon, my friend. Cheers. Para disfrutar el capítulo completo, abre una cuenta totalmente gratis en BrinxTV y empieza a acumular BrinxBox para canjearlos por productos oficiales del programa.